The southern resident killer whales, made up of J, K, and L pods, range from central British Columbia to central California. Unlike some other whale species, they aren't migratory. They don't have a specific breeding grounds or foraging grounds, but do still have seasonal preferences to their habitat usage. The more we learn about them, the more we're beginning to realize that each pod has a different pattern to how they utilize their shared habitat that likely reflects pod-specific foraging strategies. For example, J-pod is more commonly encountered in the Salish Sea year-round, and when venturing to the outer coast, they don't go very far south. By contrast, K and L pods spend much of the winter and spring on the outer coast, traveling south to Oregon and California. Historically, the Salish Sea was the core summer and fall habitat for all three pods. They were drawn to inland waters by the abundant Chinook salmon runs returning to the Fraser River from April through September. In addition to gathering here to socialize, the whales would make a predictable circuit in through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, up Harrow Strait to the mouth of the Fraser River in the Strait of Georgia, following the incoming salmon. The whales would then circle back down through the San Juan Islands and make the loop again. By the fall, the whales would transition to spending more time in Puget Sound proper, taking advantage of both Chinook and chum salmon, returning to rivers such as the Nooksack, Skagit, Snohomish, and Puyallup. While the relationship between the whales and the Salish Sea salmon runs was presumed based on their overlapping occurrence, in the last couple decades, diet studies have given us new insights into which specific salmon runs they are relying on during which times of year. One such study, published by Hansen et al. In 2010, focused on the southern resident Salish Sea diet. This map shows the various tributaries of the Fraser River, as well as all the Puget Sound rivers, listed from north to south. The graph shows what proportion of the whale's prey samples were made up of which salmon stock throughout the summer, with the upper reaches of the Fraser River showing up in May and June. Later in the summer, they're feeding on salmon returning to the lower Fraser River region, and then on fish returning to Puget Sound by September. A more recent diet study looking at the rest of the year further illustrates the importance of Puget Sound runs to the whales in the fall and early winter. Utilizing the data from prey studies and the spatial and temporal overlap of the whales and certain fish, NOAA developed a priority list of the 30 West Coast salmon stocks of greatest importance to southern resident killer whales. This list contains salmon stocks from throughout the southern resident range, representing their overall reliance on coast-wide Chinook salmon abundance. 5 of the top 10 stocks, however, come from the Salish Sea. Over the last 15 years, we've witnessed a dramatic shift in habitat usage by the southern residents. They used to be present in the Salish Sea on a near-daily basis from April through September. This chart shows the number of days the whales were present in inland waters each month, with the overall height of the stacked blue sections indicating their total presence here from April through August. The black line indicates the total escapement of 2 Fraser River spring Chinook salmon indicator stocks that are utilized by the Pacific Salmon Commission. You can see an overall decline in both the presence of the whales and the numbers of salmon returning. Salmon returns that used to number 40 to 60,000 have now dwindled to 10 to 20,000. The whales used to average well over 100 days present during this part of the year, but that has now fallen to fewer than 30 days in the last few years. September, when they switched to feeding on more Puget Sound fish, has been the only month where the whales have still been present for the same number of days as they were historically. To support the health and recovery of the entire southern resident population, we need to be discussing salmon recovery in rivers from British Columbia to California. Because they used to be here so often in the Salish Sea, the southern residents got the misnomer of being labeled Puget Sound Orcas. Columbia and Snake River salmon runs also make the top 10 priority stocks list, which is why we focus on issues such as breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams. It's important to remember that these outer coast rivers likely have greater importance to K and L pods. Salish Sea salmon stocks are critical for all 3 pods in the summer and fall, but for J pod year-round. If we want to have the southern residents return to the Salish Sea the way that they used to in April through August, the prey studies and presence-absence numbers highlight how the focus needs to be on the Fraser River. These whales were initially named residents because they spent so much time in the Salish Sea feasting on abundant Fraser River Chinook. While it's only one piece of the bigger puzzle, it's a critical one. We can only hope that with the phasing out of fish farms in BC waters and a long list of other recovery efforts, Fraser River spring Chinook will begin to recover, and we'll begin to see the southern residents more often again in the Salish Sea. The return of J-Pod in May and early June of this year, after not visiting at all during these months last year, is a small glimmer of hope that maybe we're starting to be on the right track.